Hello everyone, this is the first video of series about AWS API Gateway. One of the main reasons to create this series is there are many videos about API Gateway in YouTube, but most of or some of them are obsolete. So as you know, AWS keep adding more services and extend the functionality of the existing services. That is same for applicable for AWS API Gateway too. So that's why most of the videos are obsolete or old. So with this video series, I'm going to cover concept from basic functionality to more advanced features that include not creating a API gateway, but also how to secure the API gateway, integrate with the other services such as SQS, Lambda, DynamoDB, and a third-party API. Of course, I'm going to cover how to troubleshoot when something goes wrong. If you are interested with any other topic or need to know something specific, please comment below so that I can change the priority of incoming videos. Just before kickoff, just a kind reminder, please like and subscribe. It would be really appreciated. Enabling the bell icon will be make sure you get the notification for the future videos. Right, without spending more time, let's start. Let's go on a bit of theory. API Gateway is a serverless service and fully managed service provided by AWS, which allow you to create, publish, and especially secure APIs at any scale. It is more important at any scale. What does it mean? So the API Gateway is scale in a scale out based on your number of requests. Basically, it supports a conventional API, a RESTful API, and the WebSocket. So let's say if you want to create an application with a real-time two-way communication, that's where you can use the WebSocket feature provided by API Gateway. Furthermore, API Gateway is a pay-as-you-go. You just need to pay only for the usage. The other good feature is with the API Gateway for free trial account. So 1 million API calls received per month, it's free. So you have enough time, enough resources to try out API Gateway without spending even 1 cent. So as you can see this 1 million API received is free. Plus it supports some RESTful API, WebSocket, and that's something we're gonna through and practical. Just to show you a bit of brief understanding of the API Gateway, as you can see, we do have API Gateway can be called from different services, IoT devices, web application, or any desktop application. And then API Gateway can be this is a CloudWatch. You can get the logs through the CloudWatch, and plus you can use CloudFront CDN. It's a CDN for the AWS for the caching to make this speed. And plus API Gateway can be called many AWS services plus any other application outside the AWS. So that's kind of overall idea of the API Gateway. And cool, hope that is enough theory, and I have attached this documentation for your reference. You can have a look. Let's jump into AWS console and play around. That is the best way to learn. Right, we are in the AWS console and let's create our first API Gateway. Search API Gateway in a text box, search box, and click on select API Gateway. As I have a one test API already, otherwise this is the screen you get. Otherwise you will see a default screen with the create API button. So I click on create API, and this is the next screen you will get. Here you have a few options depending on your requirement. Mainly there are 4 options. The first one is HTTP API. If you are building a conventional API, something like non-RESTful, then this is the option. The second one is a WebSocket API. If you are creating an application needs real-time data or two-way communication, then this is the option. This is suitable for more about like chat application or real-time dashboard. Then the third other two options are pretty similar, the third one and fourth one, except the last one is accessible through only your VPC. The third one is a more public access. You can access this kind of RESTful API through the internet. Let's click build, and both import and build goes to the direct to same screen. What I'm going to do, I'm going to click build. Again, you have a few options. So you can create an API from the scratch, which is the first one. And the secondly, you can clone an existing API. If you have a already existing API, for example, in my case, I do have a one API already, you can clone it. The third one is, let's say if you have a API written in other language like Node or Python, which is more compatible with the Open API standard, then you can import the API from the third option. The fourth option is example. Basically, you can use some example like a sample API code to use rather than creating from the scratch. Let's create a new API, which is the first option to make things easy, and you can give a name. Let's say demo1, and you can give a description. So again, you do have an API endpoint types. You can see regional, edge optimized, and private. If you select the private, basically you can access only through your VPC, a specific VPC. And the regional, yes, you can access from the internet. And the edge optimize is more like if you want to more performance, more fast performance on API. So this is where you can use edge optimize. We will do in a later session how to create edge optimize API. For I'm going to go, let's create a create API. Right, as you can see, the first default screen is under resource tab, and whatever the links in the middle, which is this, is specific to demo 1, the one that we created. But the first three and the last 4 are specific, not specific to this API. These first three and the last 4 links are more global level settings for the whole API. What we're going to do, we will go through each each item, and let's see what are they supposed to do. Let's start with the APIs, very first one. This is where you can see all the API we are creating. It's pretty simple. The second one is a custom domain name. This can be used to integrate with the AWS Route 53. Let's say you want to expose this API endpoint with a nice URL like https://demo1.com.au, something like. That's where you can use this customer domain name. But today we are not gonna create any domain name, but keep in mind this is where it's used. The third one is a VPC link. This option is used to traversal the traffic within the AWS network. It's more about network related to the network strategies. So, but bit of advanced topic at the moment, but we will cover this later sessions. The resources. Let's say if you go to API, and let's go the resources. This is the next menu item. This is where you can create endpoint action. Example, you can create a get endpoint for the customer, post endpoint for the customer, sort of thing. All the endpoints come to here. We will create a one by one in a later on. The stages. Stages are think about like a different environment of your deployment process, like dev environment, staging, or product environment. We'll come and create a different environments soon. And the authorizer, the other option is authorizer. The authorizer are used to secure the API gateway endpoint. If you want to secure endpoint, this is where you can use authorizer. One of the option is authorizer. So if you go click on that, there are two types of authorizer, Lambda and Cognito. One of them you can use to secure your endpoint. Then the gateway responses. These are the responses from API for different status code. You can customize these responses for each status code if you really like. The models, again, model support for send a different payload. And the resource policy, yes, this can be used to control the access of the API. You can create a policy to define who can access on what resources, etc. For example, if I go to create policy, you can use some template. Of course, based on the AWS account, you can give some permission, allow or deny, and based on the IP range or based on the source VPC. For example, if you have multiple VPC, which VPC can access this endpoint. Obviously, documentation is something you can create for the each particular endpoint. And the dashboard, yes, dashboard is this is where you can see all the metrics of this particular API. Currently, we don't have any traffic, we just created, but later on we can see some metrics in this dashboard to, for example, get some idea on troubleshoot some how much request comes and how much it get failed, how much, like 200 response or 404 sort of thing, different status. And the API setting, this is API setting, the last one under this specific one. This is basically say, okay, what are the sort of metadata information of this API. And let's go to the usage plans, right? So the usage plan is the other one. It's a more common setting for the API. You can create a usage plan which can use to impose some limitation. If you need any throttling on the rate, for example, if you open if you're gonna create a usage plan, you could give a name and you can use some throttling on the rate, burst, and plus you can give some code. For example, for a particular customer, one of the customer need only allow 1,000 requests per day or 1,000 requests per month. So that's sort of the things we can use. We can achieve through the usage plan. Then the API keys. This is something going side by side with the usage plan. Let's say we have a customer need some 100,000 limits per day. Then you can create an API key, then attach to particular usage plan. So the customer has to use the API key whenever they try to access the API key. Those requests are limited as per the usage plan. The next one is the client certificate. This is the other side of the certificate for the server side. Let's say we do have a server side certificate. This is other one is a client certificate. Again, the server certificate are used to identify the server, where the client certificate is used to verify the client. So in this case, who's the client? Let's say if the API is integrated with the other services like Lambda, then the client is our API gateway. So the Lambda want to verify the request come from this API, then the client certificate is in action. So as mentioned earlier, we will do all this scenario and practically in coming session. Very last one is settings. Of course, this has a few settings. One is you can log the API request like metadata, payload for some troubleshooting purposes. Other one is more account level throttling, which applies to all the API under this account. But still you can override these settings in a specific API if you really need. Let's say for a specific, let's say we do have one API which need more throttling. Let's say we need to throttle, in this case it's 1,000 requests per second. Let's say you want to give a bit more responses, more request, allow more requests. You can override in a specific API. So that's kind of a brief understanding on what's the menu item in the left. Right, we are in a resources tab. This is the place where we are creating our API endpoints. Today we're going to create an API which can be get user details and post. Let's start with the get user endpoint first. At the initially we have only one root resources. This is start with a slash. What we need to do, create a resource for the users. So in this case we are creating the users, and maybe you could have another action or endpoint could go for the product. So then we create another resource called product. Let's create a resource and give it a name as a users and keep all the default setting as it is. Click on the create resource. Now we are in our /users endpoint. Then what we need to do, we need to create a get endpoint. As we go to the methods, because this is a RESTful API, we're gonna create a get method. The method type is a get, and we will create a post method later on. So this one is a get because we are fetching the user information that's supposed to do. Next, integration type. Mainly we have 5 options as an integration types. This integration type is destination place where actually the task is done. In this case, fetch user details. When the end user call this get endpoint, someone should respond with the details. That task is done by the integration type we are selecting here. I will quickly go through each type roughly. So the first one is a lambda function. This is very common scenario. You can select existing lambda function which will do your custom task. The second one is a HTTP. This support to integrate with any existing API. If you have any existing API, so you can use that endpoint. The other one is a mock. Mock is the AWS get a mock response for us. You don't need to worry about. This is more about for the testing. AWS services. This option can be used to integrate with any other AWS services like SQS. This is there's a video link which show how to integrate with the FIFO SQS in the description down below. So if you are interested, please check out that. And the VPC link, which is the last one. This option can be used to integrate with any other AWS services which are not publicly exposable. So this is where we are using the VPC link. So in this case, what we're going to do, we're going to selecting the lambda function. Once you click the lambda function, what we need to do, we need to select the which end function we are invoking. So you need to select the actual region. We have the actual region. So then you need to select the actual lambda function. So in this case, already I created a lambda function, the sample lambda function. That is the one which is, you can see the test hello lambda. So I'll show you the lambda quickly. So we need to select the lambda. Then if I show you the actual lambda quickly, so you can see this is a test hello lambda, which is a Python again, and the code is pretty obviously very simple. What it does, it's print the event, whatever the event it's coming, and it's returning the user array. So in this case, we do have two users, and which going to be passed back to people whoever call this lambda function. So you can see we are sending the status code 200 and the users object. That's very simple. So we can, if we click on the test method, so basically if I quickly test the lambda, so you can see we get the response as a status code and with the lambda, with the body, whatever the user information. So if I go back to API Gateway, keep the default timeout as a 29 second, which is the maximum limit you can go with the API endpoint. So create a method. Right, we got the get endpoint. As you can see, if I click on the get endpoint, this is a configuration or setting of the get endpoint. And what you can see, I'm quickly go through some important part. So under this get endpoint, this is the method request. You can see what some of the settings for the method request. You can authorize, or what it's called, you can guard with some authorization mechanism with the endpoint, because currently this get endpoint anyone can invoke this get endpoint, and you can secure with the API key sort of thing, and there are a few other settings too. And if you go to the integration request, this is where we set up the lambda. As you can see, we set the integration type as a lambda, and whatever the lambda function is it. And then integration response, it is all whatever the response come from the lambda, and the same thing for whatever the response go back to the people whoever called this API gateway. Right, so if you click on this, as you can see the actual lambda. Once you click, it's open up the actual lambda. You can quickly navigate to the lambda. Right, so that's all about the get request. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna start create a post request, and then we will do how to test this in using Postman or any other client tool. Right, now we start creating a post method. So let's what we do, we clear all the messages. There are so many messages came, and under user, click on the user and create another method which is post. So same way we select the lambda function, and again I create another function which is post user. So if I show you the post user, pretty much it's a sample application with the Python. So what you can see, we are dumping the event, whatever the event comes through the lambda, and we say posting user details. This is where you can actually create save the user information to database, and then you can pass the response back to the caller. That's very simple. So if we go back to API Gateway and then we select the post user lambda and click on the create method. Right, now we do have a two methods. So as you can see, if you want to add another one, let's say you want to get the endpoint for the product, so you will create another resource which is called products and create resources. We do have this one, we go inside the under user. So what we can do, we can delete. So you need to click on the root, then click on the products. Right, so now we do have a products, and you can click another. So under products, we need to create a, let's say we want to get the get method. Let's say in this case we will say it's a mock, and just to make sure we do something to show. So as you can see, we do have a products endpoint and the user endpoint. Right, now let's see how do we call this endpoint. So let's say we want to call the get endpoint first. So as a resources, you are at this moment you are not able to call this endpoint from the outside through the internet. So what you want to do, something called deployment. That's something I mentioned in the stage. So we need to deploy this API into some environment. So what we're going to do, we will deploy this endpoint to a new, currently we don't have any stages. What we're going to do, we will create while we are deploying. So let's click on the users, or we can click on the top level and deploy API. So we are going to deploy a new API. Currently we don't have any stage. What we need to do, we need to create a stage. Let's say we are deploying to dev environment, and let's say this is the dev environment for testing. Let's say testing. So you can create a sit environment or staging or production and so on. So what's going to happen when we create a dev environment? As you can see, we are in the stages tab, and under dev environment we do have a product and we do have a user. So if I click on the get endpoint, this method to set it from dev, some of the information, and this is where the invoke URL. This is how you invoke this method. If you go to the post, this is the post method, this is the get method. If you go to the product, what you can see, this is a dev dash product. So if I go to the get again, so you say dev dash user. So let's try any Postman or any other client tool, whatever you're familiar with, and try to call this endpoint. Right, I'm in a Postman. So if you do not know what is Postman, Postman is a client tool. You can pretend it like the front end, and you can do some HTTP request or any other request, like it's supporting web request or most of the. If you go to here, and what you can see, if you click on the new, you can do lots of requests through the Postman. So graphical, gRPC, WebSocket, Socket.io, MQTT, so many things it is supported. So in this case, what we're going to do, currently I do have a collection and the API, and the API we do have folder. What we're going to do, we're going to create a new, I'm going to delete the existing ones and add new request. So new request, it says, okay, it's a get request because we need to call the get request, and let's get the URL. So I'm copy the invoke URL, go and save it, and can save it. And let's say change the name. We will change the name into, let's say, get users, because get is already shows as a in the Postman. What we're going to do, let's say users. Right, so we have a get users, and this is the endpoint. Once we click on the send, here we go. Right, what's going to happen, we get the result. So where do we get this result? It's called the get endpoint, and which called our lambda. So in the lambda, if I show you the lambda, so lambda code is something like this. So basically it's written in the user to user objects. So that's the object we are getting over here. Right? So if you want to get the post, let's try with the post one. So we need to create another one, add new request. This is this time it's a post, and let's go to the post request. How does it look like the post request? Click on the post, and then you can see the same URL. It's just only the verb is different. So what I'm going to do, I'm copy the same one. This is a post request, and this one again, the users. This is a user post request. This is a get. This is a post. I'm going to save it. Yeah, now it's a post, and if I click on that, what you can see, you get the some response, which is user, which is get from the other lambda, which is this, right? As I mentioned, so we can pass all the event, and that information we can extract and put it to database. So for example, if I go back and let's see the monitor tab on the post user and go to CloudWatch, we will see what's coming on. CloudWatch is something like a very helpful tool if you want to debug and get some insight of the lambda. So currently we do have a lambda. You can see the event is nothing. So this is lambda logs, because we haven't sent any event. So what we can do, we can send some event with the post request. Let's say if we go to the body, it says throw, and we select as a JSON, and let's say we are sending something, ID is a 2, and the name as a demo is 1, right? So if I select this and send back, what we're going to do, we get the same response because it's a more hard-coded value. But if we go back to our lambda logs and give a refresh, right, we can see this is the start of the invocation, the new lambda invocation. So you can see our data is went through to the lambda. So within the lambda, it's up to you to decide what we're going to do with the information, this information. If I go to code, so this information, you can extract whatever information, you can save it to database, and anything you can do with the data. So that's how you can invoke the data. As I mentioned, if you want to invoke the API, you need to push into the staging. right, if you go to the resources again, so one thing, make sure if you do some changes, for example, if you do some changes in the API resources, under resources, you need to deploy, otherwise that changes won't be reflect. If we call over here, that changes won't be reflect. So that's pretty much the very simple API integration with Lambda. Right, now we have a simple API gateway endpoint which is user and it is working. That is great as far as we don't have any issues. What if API is getting error and need to troubleshoot? That is where the CloudWatch log and dashboard are helpful. The next video is all about troubleshooting tips if the API gateway is not working as expected. So stay tuned. Just before go, a kind reminder again, if you like this content, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Then see you on next video, which is troubleshooting API gateway. Thanks.